Mhm.
Hello. This is Eric with the Paperback Warrior blog, podcast, YouTube channel. As you can see on my screen here, I've got a guest with me today. His name is Greg Shepard. He's the owner and editor of Stark House Press, a name that's nearly synonymous with Paperback Warrior. Stark House Press has released countless vintage fiction titles and contemporary releases. Authors like Harry Whittington, Lionel White, Gil Brewer, Day Keene, Bruno Fisher, David Goodis. The list of crime fiction, crime noir heavyweights is long, and Greg and his Stark House Press publication has really dabbled into just a little bit of all of those authors and their bibliographies in some way. Greg, thanks so much for coming on the podcast and channel. It's great to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
I think it's a good opportunity for listeners and viewers to put a face with a name. I think we're through 118 some episodes of the podcast, and we've discussed Stark House Press books on nearly every episode. That's either promoting them as upcoming releases, reviewing the books, or tying them into an author feature. And I checked this morning, I think we've written something like 200 reviews on Stark House books just on the blog alone. So it's a really remarkable relationship, don't you think?
Very impressive. Yeah.
uh, Beyond just covering the books with reviews and commentary, Paperback Warriors actually appeared in some of your releases. I know Tom wrote an introduction to a Harry Whittington twofer, and I had the opportunity to write an intro for a Lionel White twofer as well. So it's been really exciting for both of us to briefly step into the world of publishing and be involved in that fashion. So thanks for including us in some of these publications.
Hopefully, I can pull you into another one.
Yeah, I hope so. I just need to get more educated on some of these authors. A lot of the authors that you publish, a lot of the books that you publish they're new to me. So it's kind of where I'm getting started with reading them. So hopefully I'll become an expert at some point, but some of it's still new to me.
Yeah, I don't know how you become an expert except just through time.
Yeah, flipping pages, lots of pages.
Lots of pages, which I'm sure you're good at.
Well, you and I have talked through email and stuff for years about your early childhood reading habits, some of your favorite authors growing up. What were some of the books and authors that really kind of propelled you at a young age to embrace reading and even collecting books?
Well, I first started collecting paperbacks through the school program called Scholastic Books, and I started buying Jules Verne and H.G. Wells and Edgar Allan Poe and Charles Dickens, and just having quite a time with it. But then in my early teens, my grandmother handed me a stack of ace books of Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Ah,
Those really propelled me into the world of science fiction, adventure, and fantasy in a big way, um, bigger than Jules Verne even. And I just started reading them voraciously and collecting them, and then started looking in the backs of these ace books and saying, well, what else can I get? And started just going crazy with authors right and left. Um, and it kind of exploded from there.
it's interesting because when I even today when I'm reading like a vintage paperback, I always look in the back and there's a list of all the titles that are upcoming.
Mm-hmm.
And I can find new books that way by just looking at all these old books they list in the back as upcoming books, and hey, next year in
Yeah.
1967, you have all these books coming out.
Yeah,
So I
there's
just
a
got to
wealth
go
of
down the list.
information in the back of those books.
It really is.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just wish the 50 cents that I could send off now would get me the book, but
Yeah, right.
unfortunately not. Um,
Mhm.
your online bio states that you have dabbled in things like graphic design, rock music critique, painting, book
Mhm.
buying. Of course, you were a publisher sales rep, which we'll talk about in a minute. Book
Mhm.
distributing, sort of like you went from like this artistic journey of creating to almost like a type of curator in a sense. Is that right?
Well, it's been kind of a long road. I've been in the publishing business one way or another, really most of my life, working for as a graphic design artist for a magazine, paste up in the local newspaper and writing for them, becoming a sales rep, just kind of one step leading to the next. And also, I'm a very hardcore book collector, so curator, if you will. I guess it's just kind of part of everything had kind of led up to this point, really.
Yeah. We had talked with you through, I guess, through email. I've probably talked with you in the past about your career working for Zebra Publishing, which of course was an imprint of Kensington Publishing Corporation. This was,
Mhm.
Greg, this was probably in the 80s, early 90s when you were working for Zebra. Is that right?
Right, late 80s mainly. I think it was the early 90s when they decided that they didn't need a sales force anymore, so they let us all go.
Uh, okay.
But I did love working for Zebra. They were a great company to work for. They were very generous. They were the two owners of the company, Walter Zacharias and Roberta Grossman, were approachable people, and you could actually talk to the person who owned the company, and they were always looking for feedback. It was a good time, really. I quite enjoyed working for Zebra. I didn't find myself being wildly enthusiastic about all the romances, but I was quite prepared to go out there and sell them if that was the gig.
Yeah, that you touched on what I was going to bring up too. Walter Zacharias, am I saying the name right?
Zacharias?
Zacharias and Roberta Bender Grossman. Did they both work previously at Lancer Books? Was both of them involved with Lancer?
I really don't know too much about Roberta's background. But yes, Walter Zacharias was one of the partners in Lancer. I believe he was also a partner in Pyramid Books.
Oh, okay.
According to Walter, he had some connection with Ace Books. Even at one point, he claimed to me that
Wow.
he was one of the people that came up with the idea for Ace Doubles. True or not, I don't know.
It sounds good. I'll go with it. Yeah, when we talk about Zebra, that's a publisher that's often sought after by mass market paperback collectors, especially the horror community.
Hmm.
I mean, Zebra is oddly enough, Zebra seems very collectible these days, especially after Paperbacks from Hell book came out and everyone's now seeking those Zebra paperbacks. It looks like their uh, their pricing has kind of gone up over the last
Yeah,
5 or 6 years.
it's really amazing to me because I couldn't give those things away when I was a sales rep. Because my territory was Northern California, and I guess there was a certain arrogance in the bookstores in Northern California that they kind of looked down on these cheesy little horror books. But we they put a lot of money into the covers, and they were very attractive looking books, and some of them
Yeah,
were rather good. Not all of
yeah.
them.
Well, the Zebra paperbacks I've always looked for in the used bookstores. It's
Hmm.
always on my list to check out is those Zebra mystery puzzler books. Have you ever seen those?
I've seen them, but they were before my time at Zebra. I
Yeah,
think, in fact, they were probably before uh, Zacharias and Grossman bought the company.
probably so. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they came out in well, it would have been around the same time. They came out in the late 70s, and they
Hmm.
have like the beautiful covers, but they had like this really weird thing where, and you may know more about me, but they wrapped the last chapter in a wrapping so you wouldn't be tempted to solve the crime yourself by flipping to the back section. And it was
Yeah,
almost like you,
they love gimmicks.
it was totally a gimmick where you
Hmm.
had to figure out the killer yourself based on the cover art. It was very detailed cover art, and then the clues along the book, and then at the end it would ask you, who do you think is the killer? And then
Hmm.
you would unwrap the backing of it, and then you would be able to see who the it's like
Hmm.
not like a choose your own adventure, but it's an interactive type of book.
Hmm. I never
But
actually had a chance to sell those, but those would have been fun to do. Um,
yeah,
yeah.
I think some of the other paperback publishers had their own little gimmicks as well. I think Bantam had one that was sort of gimmicky like that. I guess anything just to try to sell just to sell more
Oh,
books.
yeah. I think it was
Um,
Zebra that came up with the first hologram cover. I could be
oh
mistaken, but it was certainly that was something that they loved
yeah,
to do in that kind of gimmick.
yes, they had a lot of those. Zebra was mostly known for their, like you touched on earlier, their Regency romance titles, and of course, their horror paperbacks. You guys had writers like Ruby Jean Jensen, Bentley Little was there early on, Joe R. Lansdale, um, Rick Hotchula was one of them.
Richard
But
Wallace
like,
is, in there.
yep,
Big names. Big names.
yeah, big names. Did you? I know W. Johnston was another big one as well. Not only just for horror, because he was doing tons of horror paperbacks, but he was also doing Out of the Ashes and the men's action adventure paperbacks and things like that. Did you have any? Did you have an opportunity to meet him? Did you ever cross paths with
No,
him?
he never came to any of the conventions, any of the sales conferences. He was considered probably one of the more obscure writers that wrote for Zebra. He stayed at home. He just wrote. I always kind of pictured him in this little cabin in the woods. Uh, but it was very clear to me. It was because we asked the editors, can we ever meet this Johnson, or have you ever met this Johnson? No, nobody had ever met him.
Wow. Yeah, there's so many different, and you and I talked about this, last week when we talked briefly, but there's so many stories out there about him and being reclusive, and he was apparently like an FM late night radio host. Of course, he was in the military,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just he writes he's very right wing, very far right writer with his Out of the Ashes stuff, but then he writes crazy off the wall horror stuff. And did he? I'm assuming that he was one of the bigger Zebra sellers. Was he the big guy?
He was probably the biggest men's adventure writer, probably Western, probably horror. That was the William Johnston, and then the next tier down would have been Hautala and Ruby Jean Jensen and authors, and then kind of down from there. But yeah, the Johnson books always sold, which I never understood because it didn't seem real readable to me. But that's maybe it's just a matter of taste. I don't know.
Yeah. My and I've said it on the podcast before. My dad is a huge fan of his, and he reads
Mhm.
everything. And he even said, "Hey, Dad, those books you're buying at Walmart, the last week, they aren't. It's not him. He's Johnston's dead, and this is a totally different writer. But to him, it's just the same. He just still reads
Mhm.
them just like he would any other. He's read that Out of the Ashes series like a dozen times all the way through. He's read every every book, and I could suffer through two books, and I was like, I'm out. I'm done. Like this is the most ridiculous thing. But he really likes them a lot.
Mhm.
In fact, he just called me. He's reading one right now. I think it was a 2-book series. I think it was on Zebra that Johnston wrote about it's about a guy who can shapeshift into a werewolf, and I think one of them's called Hunted and the other's called Prey. And my dad's like, these are just great books. So I don't know.
Mhm.
I may try them at some point, but not. It's not on my list to read right away.
I've always meant to read one of his horror books, but I never could quite get past the first few pages. So
Right.
but it's on my mm, list of books to read in my lifetime if I ever have a down
Yeah.
moment.
When we talk about like the mass market paperbacks, how much of a market share did Zebra have when it's compared to the rivals like Signet or Bantam or Pocket Books?
Hmm.
Do they have a sizable chunk of the market?
Well, they had a sizable chunk of the romance market,
Yeah.
unquestionably, and they were always trying to make inroads into the rest of publishing it. But they always had a real hard time getting on the New York Times bestseller list. Um, then they started putting out a hardcover line, and they started doing more mysteries, and they were always kind of looking around. I think eventually, when they dropped the Zebra name and just went to Kensington, um, and it's now run by Walter's son Stephen Zacharias. I think that they've succeeded over the years better than when I was working for them in the late '80s.
Yeah.
We didn't, it was always a matter of trying to get on the bestseller list,
Yeah.
push those books. You know.
Well, I think you touched on this earlier. I think some of the highbrow stores and things like the chains were probably. Did you find that they were kind of frowning upon Zebra based on like the campy look of it?
Well, yeah. In my marketplace in Northern California, yes.
Yeah.
you know, some of the better customers I had at the time were Tower Books, because they appealed to everybody, and
Hmm.
so they didn't have any problem with buying lots of romance and men's adventure and things like that. But the average bookstore in Northern California did kind of look down their nose at what I was doing.
Right. Did you have a favorite retailer that you like to call on back then? I know that you had like, or some of the big ones, Tower, B. Dalton, Walden Books.
Mm, Um, Tower was probably one of my most favorite. I was trying to think of, there were lots of buyers in the area that I enjoyed selling to, and going down to Palo Alto and Santa Cruz, and sometimes I would get sent up to Seattle. I can't really think to myself that I had any serious favorites, but because everybody had their own little thing.
Yeah.
There might be somebody that did in fact sell a lot of romance, and they were kind of fun to go to, because then I could get a real sense of what I had, whether this was a good author this month or not, because they
Yeah.
tell
Right.
me.
Well, you ultimately retired from the corporate book business world in what, the early mid '90s that you retired from
Well,
the business.
I think the term in England is made redundant, but I'll take retired.
Okay.
They really did. They let their entire sales force go and hired New American Library sales force,
Mm,
which I thought was interesting, because New American Library also had a very similar list that Zebra had, romance and mystery and horror,
hmm.
etc. So I don't know how that worked for them, because frankly, once they let their sales force go, we were, you know, it didn't matter anymore. However, I
Right.
had previously worked for a fellow who sold British paperbacks in the United States. So my then wife at the time, my um, we put this concept together of creating a business called Firebird Distributing, of bringing British books back into the U.S. again.
Hmm.
Uh, these kind of looking after the titles that nobody else was selling, books that that weren't available over here, and once again, Tower was one of my biggest customers.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
How long did you run that particular business?
that one might have lasted 10 years. I can't remember exactly.
Oh, wow.
I probably should have looked up some dates for you before getting on here. But one of the things that killed it was Amazon, because all of a sudden you could get British books without having to pay lots of money for them, and then Tower was having problems, and they sent thousands of dollars of returns back to our warehouse.
Ah.
That was hard to kind of recover from, and
Mm.
for one reason or another, we decided that the business was not viable anymore, and we shut it down.
How did you come about with Stark House Press? How did that form? What was the beginning of that?
Well, while I still had Firebird Distributing, my dad came to me, and he had been somebody who was in the newspaper and magazine business most of his life, and he had retired. He had previously worked um, at lots of different kinds of magazines, but at this point, I think he was kind of looking for something new, and he thought, well, why don't we put together a publishing company? And I thought, well, this is a great idea. He thought, okay, we all had our various skills. My mom was a proofreader, and he could be editor, and I had a company where they're distributing books, and I had contact with authors. My brother was an art director, still is, and my then wife was an artist. And so we just put these skills together and created our first book, Oracle Lips by Storm Constantine. We printed 1,000 copies, signed, numbered. Oh boy, this was a slick production, and sold about 100 of them,
Uh,
maybe 150.
mm,
So the rest of the family kind of looked askance at my first choice there of authors, and
Yeah.
they kind of backed off a little bit, and it then kind of remained, you know, it was sort of left up to me if we wanted to continue this, it was going to be kind of my baby, and eventually I bought everybody else out and went on and did my thing.
Yeah. It's still a little bit of a family affair, isn't it?
Well, Mark uh, is still the arts editor. Um, and I still actually, from my ex-wife, now ex-wife, still contributes the odd cover, um, and my my wife Cindy does an awful lot of the web work and proofreading some things for me, and she's totally invaluable. And let's see, is there anybody else in the family? My folks have both passed away, so it's yeah, there is some the family element still exists.
Nice. Is this your? I know you have two sons,
Hmm.
Justin and Cole. Am I saying there? Is that it?
Yeah, Justin, who lives in Texas, and Cole, who lives here in Eureka.
Did they have any interest in taking over your business if something were to happen
Not
to you?
the slightest. not,
Okay.
not even maybe.
No interest.
No, no. I say to my son Cole, someday, son, this will all be yours. And he kind of looks at me like, "Please live forever, Dad."
I love it. Yeah, it's funny. My kids know I do Paperback Warrior. They know I do the blog and the YouTube channel and the social media stuff. And sometimes I'll have like this viral post and I'll have like 100,000 views and I'll show it to my daughter. I'll say, "Look at this, I'm popular," and she'll just be like, "It's just books. It doesn't count." I'm like,
Yeah, whatever, Dad.
no interest whatsoever.
Right?
Yeah, none. So
Yeah.
that's just the way it
Yeah.
goes. Um, when you started out with the Starkhouse Press, was your goal to release books by contemporary authors, like contemporary releases, or did you really want to do
Well,
reprints?
the first goal was new authors. And the reason that we started with Storm Constantine is because since I was selling British books, I had watched all of her British books, which weren't in print over here, selling like crazy for me. So I thought, well, we'll just contact Storm and see if she'd be willing to put together a short story collection. And I sort of imagined from there that we would go on to other living authors here. But I don't think the hardback model, the numbered and signed editions worked for us, uh, or at least it didn't work in a way that it was appealing to me. I've always loved paperbacks, and so I started looking around at authors that I enjoy. But I also ended up reprinting, I think, about three or four Storm Constantine books. So I've kind of stuck with Storm for a bit, and then I went over to Algernon Blackwood
Yeah.
for two or three books because he was another favorite of mine. And I thought, well, this would be easy. He's in public domain. Won't have to work too hard. Won't have to twist his arm. Won't get any signed numbered editions, but we can
Right.
work with that.
Yeah.
and and then eventually, I kind of stumbled upon the idea of doing doing mysteries and two books in one because the mysteries were always so short
Yeah.
that it seemed like two books fit better in one. And also, the printer that I was using at the time, I was going to have to charge $19.95 no matter what I put in that book to make
Mhm.
it worthwhile to make any kind of profit. So the two books is definitely the way to go if you're going to charge $19.95.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense. When I think of Starkhouse Press, obviously you think of crime fiction, crime noir. What is it about those genres, the crime fiction? What about that genre that you like so much? What draws you to that genre?
Hmm, that's really hard to say because I haven't really given it a lot of thought why it appeals to me. The combination of tension, character, sometimes just the notion of the pure mystery puzzle. Uh, all the
Yeah.
things that make for a good mystery, but primarily, I suppose it's characters in tension, characters in lives in flux, and that can just as easily be true of for example, an Edith Wharton novel as it can a Dashiell Hammett mystery. But I don't know. There's something about mysteries that just appeal to me more.
Yeah. In the beginning, what authors or literary states did you pursue first when you decided to do the reprints outside of just public domain? Who did you go after first?
The very first mystery author that we published was Elizabeth Sanksay Holding, who had been a favorite of mine when I discovered her ace doubles. And so I had been in contact with Ed Gorman, who was tremendously helpful.
Mm,
I think it was Ed that put me in touch with a member of the family, of the Holding family. Um, I want to say a son. Um, but he was also rather old, and he eventually put me in touch with the grandson of Elizabeth Holding, and I've been working with him ever since. So, um, I didn't really set out to be a public domain publisher, though I do some public domain. So, when it came down to authors like Dave Keene and Peter Rabe, um, again, Ed was very invaluable. He put me in touch with the agent for Peter Rabe, and he
mm,
put me in touch with the agent for Dave Keene and Stephen Marlowe's
mm.
wife. And Stephen himself was still alive when we did his book. And authors like that. Um, he was always kind of pushing me to stay in the top tier what he saw, and I said, well, perhaps we should, perhaps I could do some of these guys over here. He said, I think you really should stay in the top tier for right now. Well, okay, that was good advice. I wasn't willing to buck good advice. He'd been in the
Right.
business a lot longer than I had.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely a respected guy.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard anybody say anything bad about Ed Gorman. Everyone seemed to just
Oh,
love
he
him.
was just about as generous as you could imagine.
Yeah.
Um, really nice guy. I always enjoyed talking to him. He had kind of a crusty curmudgeon attitude, but he was a lot of fun to talk to.
I've always been interested in your process of how the sausage is made, so to speak. What's your process of due diligence to learn if the rights holder, is alive, for example?
Well, very rarely are the rights holders ever alive
Right.
because I'm, reprinting books from the
Yeah.
40s and 50s. Um, but for example, we did a book. We're doing a book called "Make with the Brains, Pierre" by Dana Wilson, who turned out to be married to Cubby Broccoli of the James Bond films.
Mm,
And the fellow who recommended that I might want to consider reprinting this book is a fellow named Randall Brandt, who's I think Santa Barbara Library. Anyway, he's a main head of a library here in California, and he just he had done the diligence himself, contacting the family, so he put me in touch with them. So sometimes it's just a case of somebody putting me in touch with somebody. Um, but it's also a matter of just um, being really persistent. When it came to Lionel White, um, I just got online and kept pursuing Lionel. Lionel had died, so then there was his wife, but she had died, and so who might hold the rights to Lionel? And I eventually tracked it down to Lionel White's second wife,
mm.
cousin,
Oh, wow.
who wasn't living on the East Coast anymore. She was living up in Washington, and she's been a pleasure to work with. She holds the copyrights to all of the Lionel White books that were renewed.
Have you had any issues, like whoops moments where books are being published and then you have to go back and renegotiate contracts or iron out any type of disputes with rights?
Um, Probably, generally speaking, if I'm going to do a book that I know is in the public domain, I try to be, to do that kind of diligence too. So there's not too many whoops moments. I recently reprinted a book that um, Wildside Press has the European rights to. Um, I'm forgetting the Thomas. Terrible the memory.
Uh,
But anyway, it's
Thomas Dewey, maybe?
yeah. That's thank you. You know my list better than I do. Anyway, and he was quick to point out that I don't really technically have the rights to sell this book anywhere but northern North America. So I, immediately wrote to him and said, profuse apologies, and we'll back off and just make it North American rights only. And I think we've stepped on a couple of toes with a couple of artists that we've used their covers. But again, I've did pay them for their work. I just didn't realize that.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen just a couple situations where I'll see you'll release a book and then it'll be another publisher like maybe like a Lee Goldberg or somebody. Like I think you guys share one. I think Ovid Damaris. There's an Ovid Damaris book that I think you
Mhm.
both have out.
In the John Flagg book that we both have out.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
and
how does that work itself out?
well, their books in the public domain,
Okay.
so he has as much right to reprint it as I do.
Okay. Yeah.
I wasn't quite sure why he picked Flagg, Lee, or whoever was making that decision, because it was pretty clear that we were on a John Flagg reprint program. But when it came to Ovid Damaris, I didn't realize that he was going to be doing so many of the Damaris books. So as soon as I realized um, that he had a commitment there, I just kind of stopped doing Damaris books and only just did the one. So it just kind of comes down to, I guess, a gentleman's agreement, really.
Right.
I won't step on your toes if you don't step on mine. And sorry. Oops.
Yep. Yep. Where do you get your ideas of which books you want to reprint?
Well, I have thousands of books, so quite often I'm just looking around me. Books
Yeah.
authors that I enjoy reading, books that I've read in the past, authors who might have a book that I haven't read, but I'll pick up a title and find it enjoyable. A book that we did this month called Cornered by Lewis King. I was just kind of going through the shelves, and the K's on my shelf just happened to be at eye level, and I just kind of pulled it out and said, I wonder if this is any good. And I read it and I said, yes, this is quite readable. And just kind of proceeded from there.
Nice. Do you ever find that you become like a heavy book shopper when you're trying to track down copies of books you want to reprint? Do you have like a particular book that was really difficult to obtain?
Well, I do use ABE and eBay a lot for tracking down books by authors that I don't have. Right now, I'm kind of trying to track down some Louisa Ravel books. I'm probably the only person, myself and Curtis Evans are probably the only fans of Louisa Ravel, that we're going to change that.
Yeah,
And
I've never heard that name.
yes, we put out the Bus Station Murders and another one of her books recently.
Yes.
And tracking down all of her books has been quite a challenge because they're rare. And
Right.
one of them I just have not even been able to find anywhere. So, you just keep checking. Um, there was an Australian author named Pat Flower that I was really interested in reprinting. Somebody beat me to the punch, but I was at the at one point trying to locate all the Pat Flower books I could, and I found all but one. Um, Again, through eBay and ABE, and sometimes even Amazon.com might have them. So I'm not, I don't have an awful lot of luck locally, but fortunately, the online I can do much
Greg,
better.
I'm sorry, do you have to tear the book apart when you're like feeding it into the scanner with optical character recognition? Do you have to tear the book apart to do that?
No, I don't have to tear it apart. My um, partner in crime in this, Jeff Horzimmer, who is my associate editor out there in Texas, he has a machine that does, in fact, chop off the spine of the book and shuffle the papers and scan them immediately. And I laboriously peel the pages back and try to keep the book in as close to its original condition as possible,
Nice.
which
Yeah.
can be a little tricky with kind of flaky old paperbacks.
I think I would have to turn my head if I were going to see the book being dismembered. I think I couldn't watch.
No, it's a horrible sight.
Yeah, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it.
Yeah,
Oh,
Jeff is not a paperback collector. He's a book reader, and
yeah, okay.
he can do that. I can't do that.
Well, a lot of books that yeah, obviously, you published a lot of books from the early to mid 20th century, and a lot of books contain racial slurs or just uncomfortable dialogue or situations regarding
Mhm.
races of people. Do you remove these things when you go to reprint books, or do you keep them in? And what's your reasoning for that?
Generally speaking, I try to keep everything in as a reflection of the times, the attitudes. Sometimes dialogue is a little rough, but it's indicative of the character, telling of the character. Um, there have been some books where I simply passed on them because I just couldn't abide certain words. I
Right.
just didn't want to have anything to do with them. Um,
Hmm.
but there have been a couple of times, and I think it was James Hadley Chase, if I'm not mistaken, where the N word was used rather gratuitously. And I said, there's no reason for that to be there. And
Yeah.
I removed it in a couple of instances, but generally I just find that it's just goes against the grain to be changing books just to
Hmm.
suit modern times.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, this is probably going to open up a whole can of worms, but do you think books should be banned?
no, I do not think books should be banned. I never have. Back when I was working for a bookstore myself, in fact, I used to carry the Anarchist Cookbook before I realized that, in fact, it wasn't just a radical way of cooking radishes, but a way of making bombs. I didn't realize that, but at the same time, I felt like that if it had been published and somebody really wanted it, they should have access to it. They should have access to information. They should have access to everything. Um, just because a book has been published doesn't mean you have to read it. And I think
Right.
that's probably one of the things that bothers me most about the book banners is they say, well, I don't like it, therefore you can't read it. And
Right.
I find that just repugnant.
I wanted to talk with you about some specific books that you've published and maybe gain some insight on what drew you to those authors or titles,
Mm-hmm.
if that's okay.
Sure, sure.
Well, the first one I want to ask you about is the late, great Barry Malzberg, who you worked with for a
Mm,
long time. I think you've got at least 30 book releases of either
yeah.
his crime noir or sci-fi or action adventure short stories. What did you like about his writing and working with him?
Well, I first discovered Barry back in the 70s when I read Harrowit's World and the Beyond Apollo and the Falling Astronauts, and I just loved his cynical take on the world. I probably really appealed to anybody who's young and cynical. Um, I'm kind of a old fluff ball now, but I was young and cynical in my day, and Barry really struck a nerve with me. And I was reading an awful lot of Robert Silverberg at the time and Barry Malzberg, And then I got a chance to work with Barry because he was the um, acting agent for the Frederick Brown estate. And so
Oh,
we started
wow.
communicating, and um, I just basically said, "Well, do you have any books that are out of print that you'd like to see back in print?" And the first thing he says, "Well, Underlay, that's my favorite book. Underlay, great." So I said, "Well, let's do it." And it just kind of turned into a whole relationship. I I will admit that sometimes his sex books make me squirm a little bit, and I don't want to sound like an old prude, but sometimes they're just a little much for me. But I like
Yeah.
I like the voice in Barry's books, and they're always pretty much the same voice. But
Yeah.
I find that I've been enjoying that voice for something like 40, 50 years, and I still do.
Yeah, you published one that he did, and for the life of me, I can't think of the name of it. It was Fire something. It was one word. It was a sleaze book
Well,
about a
yeah, it's
uh, firewall.
Fire is the title.
Fire. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to look to see it. We paired it up with something else.
It's got a
Um,
soldier on the cover, I believe.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, that was. I think that could remember my own books better than I do. Uh,
so many. It's so many.
oh well, it's in here someplace. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was originally had a different title, but it was one of the very first books that dealt with uh, soldiers returning with post-stress syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
and so
Yeah.
I can't remember what the original title was. Um,
Uh, something make me or made me was something like that.
yeah, yeah.
But the one I think that I'm thinking of that was in there is the one where the guy it actually educated me on the pinball
Mhm.
industry and how
Yeah,
pinball I had no idea pinball machines were banned for
yes,
so
they were.
long. It was so interesting. And
Um,
uh and I love that character, and that's one of my favorite books. I just loved it. It was just so good.
mhm.
But and I need to read more of his work, but that one just really struck me as just really entertaining.
Yeah.
Um, you've never struck me as a fan of like men's action adventure paperbacks like Death Merchant or The Butcher or The Penetrator, but and I may be wrong, but you published his whole line of the Lone Wolf series.
Mhm.
What made that one different for you?
Well, one it had a beginning and a middle and an end, and that appealed to me as a series. I'm not really much of a series reader. I'll admit I've not read the Death Merchant and the Destroyer books, even though I used to sell them. Um, it it just I don't know, maybe a little gung ho, too much gung ho for me. I don't know, but
Yeah,
I think just the simple answer is that it was a finite series, and that I knew that he was moving toward a climax, so that you could see it almost as one book.
yeah, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
If if Starkhouse Press is the publisher that Paperback Warriors covered the most, then surely Harry Whittington is the author we've covered more than any other. You've got at least 7 publication of Whittington's work, and some of those publications, like you mentioned earlier, they feature 2, sometimes even 3 books in them. What
Mm-hmm.
did you like about Whittington's writing so much, and has his estate been easy to work with?
Well, his estate has gone through some changes, but to answer the first question is there's something about the sweaty desperation of his characters that I really like. He always just throws you into the middle of a really tense situation. He has that much in common with Gil Brewer, and of course they were friends. Um, but the estate started out. Let's see, I was dealing with a company called Jet, and then I was dealing with Howard Whittington, who passed away. That was Harry Whittington's son,
Mm,
and I think I even briefly connected with Catherine Whittington when she was alive. But they all passed away, and it's now the granddaughter who's in charge. And she is, I love working with her. Susie is great fun to work with, but she has her own business, trucking company, and she does not have time to go through and do all the research on the copyrights. And she's a really exacting person. She does not want to put her okay on anything that she doesn't feel that she knows exactly that it is okay. And I
Yeah.
appreciate that. So doing new Whittington books has been kind of a challenge um, because she hasn't had the time to work on them. But I live in hope that eventually she will.
Yeah. You've
Because
also,
she's fun to work with.
well, that's good. You've published a number of Carter Brown volumes as well, and typically
Hmm.
those feature 3 books in one volume, and I think you've got 9 total volumes out. All of them feature his Lieutenant Al Wheeler character. Do you plan on releasing any books featuring any of his other characters?
I thought I would do the Wheelers first, and then if I'm still in business, I will look at somebody else. Somebody recommended the Mavis books, and I read a couple of them. And I thought, those just don't work for me in a modern setting. They're just a little bit too sexist.
Yeah, makes
But
sense. Yeah,
those that's an interesting series. I have to say a tip of the hat to Charles Harday because he was the one that recommended. They contacted him first, the estate, and and he passed, and he suggested, "Why don't you try Starcast?" And I thought this should be fun. Carter Brown.
yeah,
What's not to like about a Carter Brown?
yeah. They're yeah, they're so much fun to read, and they're breezy, and they're just easy. And if I
Mm-hmm.
want to just kind of turn off and still have a great enjoyable reading experience, I can always go to that one. That's easy
Yeah,
stuff. I love it.
occasionally his humor makes you wince, but what the heck?
Right. You've released 26 Lionel White novels over at least 13 volumes, and you're clearly a fan of his work as well. What draws you to Lionel White, and in particular, maybe in general, maybe the heist novel in general?
Well, he is sort of the master of the heist novel. I like the way he just sets the whole thing up, and you know that ultimately it's doomed to fail, but
Right.
he still creates this situation where it looks like they could pull it off, and but there's always some little thing that happens that screws the whole thing up at the end. He's written some straight mysteries too, but he is definitely a great heist writer, and I just find them, very compelling. Um, there are a handful, maybe 6 of his books that I don't intend to reprint, either because they were maybe they just didn't work. Not everything he wrote was perfect, and
Yeah.
some of them were clunkers. But one had a very violent rape scene, and I just couldn't bring myself to bring that one back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one thing that really bothers me when reading, and I have to skip those scenes is rape.
Mhm.
I always have to skip it. It just bothers me.
Yes.
Um, I just can't do it.
Mhm.
Uh, you've also published a number of Sax Rohmer novels, and I wanted to ask you, what would you say to someone who wants to read Sax Rohmer, has never read them before? Where's the best place to start?
Hmm. Wow. Well, Fire Tongue is a very good place to start, or the where I started was the Fu Manchu books when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And I'm very aware that there's something rather racist in the notion of the wily Chinese villain, um, and some of the mysteries of the East that don't really translate into modern times as well. But he wrote such compelling stories that I kind of feel like I'm willing to overlook that kind of aspect. I
Right.
guess
Yeah.
not everybody can. I appreciate there's probably some younger readers that simply could not get past that. But Oh, I was looking here at some of the things that we've done, and I would say definitely Batwing, Fire Tongue, some of the Gray Face. There's a lot of good adventures there, and
Yeah,
they
this is the
are part. You know,
most
yeah. There's
recent
one.
one.
She Who Sleeps.
Hmm. Yeah, from this was December. Like this is your
Hmm.
most recent one, I believe.
That's a great little story. I really don't want to give it away, but it looks like that they have discovered this woman who's been kept alive in this tomb all these through the centuries, and they find her and bring her into a modern world. And it's well,
Sounds
that's
like a macabre fish out of water story.
yeah. uh, but it's the same way as E. Phillips Oppenheim. I personally enjoyed these books a lot when I was younger, and when I go back and read them, I still find them very readable. Um, and I like to think that they still have an appeal to modern readers. Not everybody, um, but unlike someone like Dickens, um, who was very verbose, who could take paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs to describe one scene
Yeah.
or one action, uh, or people like H. Rider Haggard, who I still enjoy also, but could spend an entire page on a lion attacking somebody step by step. Um, People like Oppenheimer are much brisker uh, read, and I still feel like that they have some appeal to modern readers. And Edgar Wallace is another one.
Mm.
I I guess I really do quite enjoy early 20th century writers in some ways more than modern writers.
Yeah. Yeah. Likewise, me too.
I enjoy
Uh,
the leisurely pace more too.
yeah. Well, last year the Starkhouse anthology was published, which you edited along with Rick Ollerman. And
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not mistaken, this is the first Starkhouse anthology of hand-picked stories from multiple authors. How
Mm-hmm.
did you go about picking 30 great mystery stories? Did you have to comb through like short story collections, magazines, or did you kind of work off of suggestions? How did
Well,
that come about?
I made my suggestions, but Rick did the lion's share of the work. Um, he he's had health issues, so um, it took this project has been several years in the making. Um, I think we must have probably started 10 years ago. I'm not sure where we came up with the original idea, and I had some ideas of my own and some short stories that I collected from various and sundry places, and then he had a whole bunch of ideas of his own, and he had a story of mine that I had submitted to him for something else that he didn't like for that project that he tossed in there, and then he added one of his own, um, and it kind of came together just through time, really.
I guess
And,
the question fits for the 3 volumes of the Best of Manhunt magazine, which you've put out as
uh,
well.
that is
How did
Jeff
you
Wardner's
obtain?
baby, and that's
Oh,
a
okay.
that's a labor of love. He really made that one um, work. And
Yeah.
Jeff is invaluable. He does most of the vintage covers that you see on our books because he has access to so much of the great old art. And he and David Rachels did the staccato line, and he really put together the Manhunt collections himself. So that was a lot of work, and he should not be one of the unsung heroes. That was Jeff's baby.
I got it. Very cool. Yeah, those are amazing collections. Just great stories, great authors, just amazing. Do you plan on putting out more of those?
I plan to put out more of those. Does Jeff plan to put out more of them? I don't know. I think he kind of burned out a little bit, but I hope so. I hope he will. Um,
Yeah.
you know,
Have
It's a lot of
you
work.
have you had instances where an author or literary estate just simply says, "No, I'm not interested." Do you get that?
Mm, Sometimes it's easier to work with certain copyright owners than others. I'm trying to think. Floyd Mahana, for example, I don't think his family wants any of his books to be reprinted. They are impossible to work with. I
Mm.
hope I'm not offending the Floyd Mahana family in saying that, but the fact was they they're not very easy to work with. Uh, Nobody really says no, but just will they follow up? I'm
Mm.
trying to do a couple of authors right now where I'm pursuing people who just don't have this on, you know, the same burning urgency that I do to get something back into print. And I
Do
keep reminding them, well, what do you think? What do you think? That contract I sent you, you want to take another look at it? Oh, yeah.
have you ran into situations where the heirs or the rights holders just want some kind of outrageous amount of money?
Sure, sure. I would love to publish Cornell Woolrich, unabashedly, one of my favorite writers. But I just can't see spending the money that they want, you know, to get for any one of his books. Quite apart from two of his books, um,
Mm,
and and there are some people that that are just priced beyond. Um,
yeah,
but that they consider that that's what they're worth, and
yeah, that's what it is.
yeah.
I think you and I have talked about Edward S. Aarons and how he's basically impossible. His
Oh yes,
estate's impossible.
I'm glad you reminded me about him. Yeah, that the Sun. I think it was the Sun. I wrote to him on several occasions. Would you be interested? Here's a sample contract. Here's what I'd like to do. And every time he would kind of think about it. Finally, he just came back and said, "No, no, I'm not interested." And
Wow.
I thought, well, then there must be somebody else that he is interested in. Maybe we'll see Hardcase doing these books, or maybe
Mm,
somebody else. And I've never seen them, so I have to
no.
presume that he shines everybody on.
Right.
I, I don't know why.
Yeah, it doesn't. Well, it surprises me how many times I've heard publishers talk about an author's heirs and how, I guess, disinterested they are in learning about their family's writing. It could be like a great grandchild or niece or nephew, and
Hmm.
when they're finally located, it's like, I had no idea Grandpa wrote books, or I don't know about them, never read them, never cared. Are you shocked when you're locating author heirs to determine rights and things for a book publication and just discover that they just never had any interest whatsoever in any of it?
Well, I don't encounter that as much as you might think.
No.
I get more enthusiasm than I get blaseness, if that's a word. For example, Bernice Carey, we reprinted all of her novels, and I worked with Bernice's, I think it's her granddaughter or grandniece, I'm not sure. And she says the family's just crazy about seeing these books in print again. And that just kind of makes you day.
Yeah.
Think, well,
Yeah.
you've done a justice for both sides, for the world, and now read these books again, and for the
Yeah.
family.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm getting kind of that more often than not.
I think, I won't say the author's name, but I had reached out to you last year via email because I wanted to read an author's short story on the podcast. And my fear was that the author's heir wouldn't allow it. And you were like, the heir is like a bartender or something, or he's in some bar somewhere and wouldn't care, wouldn't know, wouldn't have any interest at all, doesn't care. And I was like, wow, that's no interest whatsoever. And their uncle or somebody, I can't remember who it was, but it was
Yeah,
like their
I
uncle
don't
or something.
remember that situation myself,
Yeah,
but there are, yeah,
yeah,
there are
happens.
situations like that. Yeah.
I'm not I'm not a Hollywood insider. I don't know anything about film rights or any of those things. How does that kind of thing work out when it comes to you owning the rights to reprint? Like,
Well, I only buy the paperback rights. I don't
Okay.
buy the movie rights.
Okay.
I worked with the Lionel White copyright owner um, to put together a deal with a fellow who wants to film one of the Lionel White book, Coffin for a Hood, and he's still working on it. He's got a screenplay. He's bought the rights and he renewed the rights, and he's got a screenplay that he likes. And I hope that it happens because it sounds like it'd be a lot of fun. But it really, I'm willing to work with the copyright owners, um, but I don't actually myself own the rights to represent them unless we negotiate that as a secondary. Um,
Okay. Like you published Desert Stakeout by Harry Whittington, which just finished,
mhm.
I think, production. It's being adapted into a film, but that has nothing to do with you.
No, no, that was done strictly through the Whittington estate, and
Okay.
they took it. They handled that entirely on their end.
Okay.
Is that due to come out soon, or has it come out yet? I'm
I
looking
want to say
forward
it's
to it.
yeah, me too. I think it's this year. I think it does come out
Yeah,
this year.
I heard about it.
Yeah, I really like that book, so I'm curious to see how it turns out.
Hmm.
When talking about rights to books, the popular topic becomes that of cover art, and many of your early releases had, I guess for lack of a better term, generic artwork adorning the covers. But over the past few years,
Mark will be
you
happy to hear that.
sorry, Mark, but over the past few years, you've become way more liberal in releasing books with their original vintage covers, or you've modified an existing vintage cover to fit a new publication. In pursuing rights to artwork, is that kind of just as tricky as the rights to books? How far do you go
Well,
down the path to get a cover?
hmm, that's an interesting question because really, for the most part, um, Jeff handles. He has a list of people that he considers untouchable, and then we just work with everybody else of just using the art
Hmm.
from the original book as much as we possibly can. I was trying to think of who was it? The fellow who did the cover for Bleeding Scissors. Oh, just drawing a blank
Uh,
on that. Not McGinnis, but the other big guy. Anyway, I did work a deal for some art where I paid the daughter. Um, in fact, some of the original covers for the Gil Brewer books um, came from. I should just pull one off the shelf. It's too much trouble.
yeah, I was gonna say I might have one here,
If
but
you have one, like
not a not
some
a.
of the early ones, the uh, the black and white image came from shooting the artist's models that he then was doing covers with. So it was
Uh,
um, just, case of buying the rights to that, um, which I thought was kind of cool at the time. I'm not sure if it's as cool as I think it is, but
well, I know some books you've used foreign movie posters as the covers, like you did, I think, with Blood Alley. You're still able to get John Wayne on the cover, but you used a foreign movie poster. Are the rights more lax when it comes to like foreign film
well, we hope
posters and things?
so. Thanks for asking. Thanks for putting that out there. I don't know. You know,
Uh-oh.
that was. I told Jeff I just kind of wanted to stay away from anything too overtly John Wayne-ish,
Mm.
but he came up with this cover that came from I think Italy, if I'm not mistaken. And I said, well, I think we can get away with that. Um,
Yeah.
he's pretty good at not giving me art that he thinks is going to cause uh, any problems. And
Yeah.
I'm always happy to pay somebody if they come to me and say, well, you shouldn't have used that. I said, well, Okay, let's. I'll pay you for it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of movies, that kind of leads me to my next question was about the imprints or really good series titles that you've created. One of them, which is the Stark House Film Noir Classic, which you've been pretty active in releasing books in that series. I
Mhm.
think you've got 11 books published under that line since
I've been doing that
2022.
quarterly.
Quarterly, okay.
Hmm.
Well, my first question is that an imprint like Black Cat books, or is it just a series?
Well, excuse me, I'm losing my voice here. Um, I haven't numbered them, and perhaps I
Okay.
ought to have, but I wasn't seeing it initially as a numbered thing where you want to, collect them, trade them, have them all be the first
Yeah.
one on your block. But um, I've always been, fascinated with film noir, and I just thought, well, we've already published some books that were made into some classic noir movies. High Sierra comes to mind. Why not create a series based around some of the, the movies, books to movies, and started off with Pitfall, um, which was Night Cry. That's the most recent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. I started off with Pitfall because Timothy Lockhart had suggested Pitfall. He thought that would be he's one of our authors, and I've known him for a long time, and he sometimes makes suggestions. He said, "I think Pitfall would be great as a Starkhouse book," and I hemmed and hawed over that book for about a year, and I thought, I wonder um, if maybe we could start something with this. I'm sorry,
That's okay.
I'm not used to talking this much.
Right.
I'm
We
used
kind
to,
of went over I was thinking about an hour, but this is such a good conversation.
yeah. So anyway, the series just kind of started with Pitfall, and kind of moved from there.
Yeah. With when we talk about imprints, you've got Black Cat books, which the main difference with those is that, and you've got 70 of those books published, but they're printed in the mass market paperback format of
Hmm.
4 1/4 by 7 inches. But what's the thought process on what becomes a Stark House press release versus what becomes a Black Cat book release?
Well, something you might not have noticed is that I never repeat a Black Cat author in the series. So there's one Harry Whittington, there's one Robert Silverberg, there's one Day Keene, etc. So I sort of see this as a series that is single author, um, single book for the most part. I've even made a couple of exceptions there. I did Gary Leviti's two short Sherlock Holmes novels, but generally speaking, one novel. Um, Something that I feel like is a good standalone book. And uh, this series was suggested. The original idea, I think it was um, Rick Ollerman and I were talking about what made the old books look so good was just their size were so cool. And we
Yeah.
thought, we'll put together a series of books. Um, and I think he was the one that suggested that I number them. And I thought, okay, number, that
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah. He says, people aren't going to want to collect them if you don't put a number on them. All
Yeah.
right. Okay. Thank you very much, Rick. And it seemed like the most natural thing in the world to start with Harry Whittington, since he was a favorite anyway. Um, though it's taken me almost 70 books to get around to doing Gil Brewer as a Black Cat book, which we did Wild not too long ago,
Yeah.
um, which coincidentally happened to be the very first Gil Brewer book that I ever read. And I always wanted to reprint that one. But
Mm.
the thing that distinguishes, I guess, is um, is it a standalone book? Um, and sometimes mysteries seem to work well as a package. And I've been doing those twofers for such a long time that I think in terms of two books in one. I just got finished working on another Sax Rohmer book, a combination of Dope and Yellow Shadows, both of which feature a character named Red Carey and are both set in the Limehouse district of London in the 20s. So I saw those as a great combination that they fit very nicely together. But that
Nice.
book, Cornered, that we did recently by Lewis King, I saw that as a perfect little standalone book. And a lot of the things that we've done in that series are books that, to me, work just very nicely as single title books.
Mm.
And I still love that size.
Yeah, I do. I do too. I've noticed that you have a steady concentration on female mystery writers. Like you've got Martha Albrand, Mary Collins, Dorothy Cameron Disney, Ruth Finnesong, Marty Holland. You name it. The list goes on and on. You have a fondness for female writers more so than some of your other contemporary publishers, like Hard Case Crime, for example. What makes you want to publish a lot of female writers? What draws you to their writing style?
Hmm. I'd like to have a quick, snappy answer for you on that one. Is it the coziness? I'm not sure. There's something about women writers that pull you further into the character, perhaps. They tend to be a tad more leisurely. Though even so, you'd say Lee Brackett is fairly hard-boiled, and Craig Rice and people like that. But these are all writers that I thoroughly enjoy reading, and I haven't convinced the world that they need to read Louisa Ravel yet, but there's worlds away from, say, a Mickey Spillane and a Louisa Ravel book, because one has got a guy who uses his fists to solve crimes, and the other is a little old lady who kind of uses her wits to help solve crimes. And I guess I prefer, as I've gotten older, the wits more than the fisticuffs.
Makes sense. I think with the female writers, and I enjoy reading those almost more than anything else. It's just it's like their perspective of characters is a little different. They're like more observant, and you get a little more inner soul searching, I guess. There's kind of more inner turmoil for them to explore. And I think somebody like Margaret Millar does it just as good as anybody, really. I think you've even
Oh
published.
yeah, she's
She's really
wonderful.
good.
And
Really good,
another
good
author,
writer.
Celia Fremlin from England. I'd love to reprint her. That's another, when you were talking about estates that weren't interested in dealing with me, they weren't interested in dealing with Staircase. But at the same time, I would love to reprint some of her books because they're just wonderful character studies involving crime and murder.
I think one time in an email you had said to me when we were talking about women writers, and you had said that a lot of them contribute to a genre, and I wrote it down and I brought it up for this interview. It's malice domestic, or domestic malice. Did you coin
Yeah,
that phrase?
no, I don't think I coined that phrase. I wish I had. I don't actually remember where I encountered it, malice domestic, but
Malice domestic.
I've seen it. I think there's even a convention called that somewhere. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think so. Um, it's just it seemed to sum up a style in two words very nicely.
Yeah, yeah. I had never heard that before, and it just stuck with me every time I read one of these books. I'm like, yeah, it falls under that under that tag. Um, I'm gonna wrap this up here in just a second. I wanted to ask you just a couple more quick questions. This one, I was going to ask you about this, and this is Greg, I don't know if this is a question. I don't know if this is a question or me maybe just venting, but I'll bring this up. Let's say I review a Stark House Press publication.
Mhm.
Day Keene, Bruno Fisher, Charles Williams, Whittington, whoever it might be, just an outstanding crime fiction writer, and I'll review one of the books that you've published. I go and post that review on the blog. I'll post it on Facebook, X, Instagram, wherever. And Paperback Warrior, we get a decent amount of eyes and ears anyway. But let's say that I post a Stark House Press book review and it gets 10,000 views on average, maybe like the first day. Everyone sees it. They see that Stark House Press published it. Great. But I'll turn around and I'll review or maybe just even make mention of a hard case crime release. Let's say like Max Allen Collins or Donald Westlake or Earl Stanley
Mhm.
Gardner. All great writers, great books. But those postings will immediately garner like 50,000 views like that first day. And
Mhm.
that's not to it's my beef isn't to disparage, hard case crime or their books or their writers. It's just the reaction that hard case crime gets anytime I post their logo or book covers. It's astounding, and I don't understand why that is. Um, and that's just me venting.
Well,
But how do you feel about that?
it doesn't bother me in the slightest. I think
Okay.
Charles Harday is doing a great job. He's got a lot of great writers on his list, and he's keeping people like Donald Westlake alive, and
Yeah.
um, you know it, he tends toward more modern writers. He does a lot more original stuff than we
Yeah.
do. Um, he's a good editor, um, and I think he deserves his success. Titan Books is distributing um, or publishes the line of hard case, and
Yeah.
they're a very big company, and I'm sure that they're getting more advertising. I
Right.
know they're getting more advertising than we are,
Yeah.
because I don't spend a whole lot on advertising.
No, and and I've said it before on the podcast, and I've written this on the blog and social media and stuff. But I mean, Starkhouse Press is they run circles upon circles around hard case crime. I mean, I know it's not a race; it isn't a popularity contest, but I'm talking about in terms of curating classic vintage fiction for the next generation. Your efforts, your achievements, unmatched anywhere. Your labor to negotiate deals, do reprints, hold high standards upon your production schedule and output, the look and feel of your books, the endless supply of new publications. I just feel like Starkhouse Press should be celebrated and held in very high regard in the realms of crime fiction, crime noir, mystery, and even action adventure. And I just, for whatever reason, I just get the impression that your company comes second fiddle to hard case crime, and that really, it just really irks me when I see those things.
Well, thank you, Eric. I appreciate the comments, and you know, I don't really mind being the also ran in the slightest, because to me we're all trying to put out good books.
Yeah,
And Lee's company, Cutting Edge, same thing with what he's doing.
yeah,
Uh, I say there's room for all, and I've made this my particular niche, but Charles has his niche, and Lee and other people. Um, I say there's room for all, and
yeah.
it doesn't bother me.
Okay, good. It just bothers me.
Well, thank
Yeah,
you for bothering on my behalf.
yes. I'll carry that cross. Um, and you don't have to answer this. It's probably maybe digging a little too far into your accounting, but so you can skip this question if you want to.
But
But what does what does success look like for you when it comes to a book release? How many copies does a book have to sell for you to really consider this a successful release?
oh, that's an interesting question, and I don't think I'm going to hand out numbers.
Yeah,
We've
right.
the best selling book on the Stark House list, and I think you might find this amusing, is The King in Yellow by Robert Chambers. Now,
Wow.
I have no idea. I have sold many over 1,000 copies of that particular book.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It was written in 1898. There are umpteen editions of this book.
Hmm.
Ours happens to have paired the stories with another collection called The Mystery of Choice. So it really puts all of his weird fiction into one volume. Maybe that has something to do with it.
Hmm.
I would love to have more books that sold well over 1,000 copies, but most of them don't.
Yeah.
Um, on the other hand, we have very, very low return rate, which
Right.
to me makes a difference. I had a distributor um, that I was working with some years ago that sold um, 2 or 3 times as many books as I was selling myself. Well, you know, quite an awful lot more. But then they were just swamping me with returns. So what did I
Ah,
gain there? I didn't consider I gained anything there. I
right.
don't want returns.
No.
So, I
Yeah.
feel like most of our sales, if I sell 500 copies of a book and I've gotten 10 copies back, that I'm doing a great job because
Yeah.
uh, I don't want the returns. I'd like the hard sell, the final sale.
Hmm.
Um,
Do you do you have any regrets on publishing a certain book?
hmm, not really. No, I can't think of anything that I regret publishing. Um, I suppose if you'd given me that question to hem and haw over for a few days, I might have found one or two that,
Okay.
that were a little disappointing. But generally,
Yeah.
no, um,
Um, well, my last question for you is, there's a rising popularity for audiobooks, and I think this is mostly due to our society constantly being on the go these days,
mhm,
and also, especially for me, more and more people working from home. A lot of people do data entry jobs or jobs where they can listen to things like their Audible subscription, or they can listen to podcasts or YouTube broadcast while they're actually working. And I think that certainly boosts more and more people to listen to stories and books. We're almost in an environment where we're in that old radio show that you and I talked about last week. It seems like
mhm,
we're in the golden age of radio, where people
mhm.
are just listening to books and podcasts and things. Do you have any motivation to offer any Starkhouse press releases as audiobooks?
I think I'd be spreading myself too thin. Um, so I don't at the moment. I suppose if a company came to me and said, I could turn all these books into audiobooks and, it only cost you, you know, some some small figure, I might give it some thought, but
Yeah,
it seems like for a small operation that doesn't have an awful lot of people working, that it really is better to just stick with what you can handle rather than
yeah,
doing a whole bunch of things poorly. Just do a couple of things
right,
well. And the
yeah,
ebooks, um, you know, they they don't take up too much time, so I can handle that. Uh,
yeah.
and I should do a quick little shout out to my proofreader, Bill Kelly, who also is a tireless promoter and has written a lot of introductions for us and created some fine collections. And he's part of the team that makes this thing all work.
Yeah,
Because I'm a terrible proofreader.
yeah. Um, I lied. I do have one more question for you because I'm
Oh
holding it
no,
in my hand.
go
You've
for it.
recently just you recently just put out this,
Mm-hmm.
which is a rare Western title. You don't do a lot of Westerns, and why is that?
Um, I have a nice collection of westerns, and I keep thinking I should do more westerns. Um, they don't sell quite as well as the crime novels, um, but there really isn't a particular reason why I haven't done a lot more westerns. I think I just get distracted by the crime books. Um, it's probably why I don't do a lot of science fiction. You can only do so much. and I would like to do some more westerns, and probably will. Um, but so there really isn't a particular reason behind not doing as many westerns. I did work with Arnold Hanno and getting some of his back into print, but that was more of an author-driven thing
Yeah.
than a conscious decision to do westerns.
Do you? My last question, I promise. Do
Your final
you,
and absolute penultimate last question.
the ultimate one. I'll save this one for the last. So, do you ever I'm trying to figure out how to say this. When you're thinking about putting a book out, do you think of it in terms of this book will sell and this is why I want to do it, or do you just say I want to put this out because I really like this book? Is there
Definitely the latter.
okay?
Yeah,
You never look at if this is going
I
to sell.
don't.
It's you
No.
just like it.
Sometimes I say to myself, well, I hope this does well so it can justify another book. But I know in my heart of hearts that if I really want to put another book out by that author, that I don't really care if it's sold or not. If I want
Okay.
to do it, I'll do it.
All right.
Which is probably why
Makes
you'll
sense.
see another Louisa Ravel
Okay. All
or
right.
14
Well,
Louisas this week.
okay. Well, this has been an awesome conversation, and I'm so glad that you agreed to do it. This was just amazing. I learned quite a bit, and your thing with there hasn't been you haven't had but one author do a Black Cat book, which was amazed me because I thought I knew everything about Black Cat books, but then it just dawned on me what you said, where you said that there's not two by the same author other than the Gary Levisi. So I've learned quite a bit about your
2 and 1 though in that
yeah,
case.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I've learned
Um,
quite a bit about your process and
mhm.
everything that goes into Stark House Press and releasing all these books, and it's been fascinating. It really has been.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I should get out more.
Yeah, we'll have to you do something like this in the future just to learn a little bit more about it and maybe even tackle a book together, like a review a book or something, which would be really cool to get your perspective on it. But yeah, just keep up the good work and just keep on putting out books. It's been an amazing ride.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks very much, Eric. It's been a pleasure, and I've enjoyed the time spent here. Um,
Excellent.
we'll just keep both of us doing what we're doing.
I love it. Well, thanks for watching and tuning in, and come back for more written reviews on the blog. You can also follow us on Facebook, X, Instagram, Threads, Pinterest, if anyone still does that. We're also on archive.org. Tune in every other Monday. Every 2 weeks, there's a new podcast episode. And Greg here's got books coming out normally about 4 or 5 every month. You can always check them out on Amazon, also the Stark House Press website. And Greg himself is on Facebook as well. So you can follow everything there. In the meantime, thanks for watching and enjoy whatever it is you're doing.
Right. And keep reading.